Picture this. A team of Harvard researchers spent 30 years following over 100,000 people. They tracked what they ate, how they slept, how they moved, and when they crunched the data, one pattern stopped them cold. The people who lived the longest, the ones whose cells were measurably younger than their actual age, had one thing in common on their plate. Every single day. It wasn't a supplement. It wasn't a superfood powder. It was something you've probably walked past in a grocery store 100 times without a second thought. And here's the thing that should genuinely surprise you. The science behind why it works goes all the way down to your DNA. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand something that took researchers decades to piece together. We're going to look at exactly which food the Harvard study identified, how much of it you need, and the precise biological reason it gives your cells what they need to survive longer. We're going to walk through your telomeres, which are basically the biological clock inside every one of your cells, and show you how this food literally slows down the ticking. And then, we're going to get practical. Because knowing the science is only half of it. The other half? Knowing exactly what to do with it starting tomorrow morning. Stay with me, because this next part changes everything. Here is something most people fundamentally misunderstand about aging. We talk about it like it's a number. 65 years old. 70 years old. But your body doesn't know your birthday. Your body ages at the cellular level, and that pace can be sped up or slowed down, based almost entirely on what you eat. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that inflammation, chronic, low-grade, silent inflammation, is the single most accurate predictor of accelerated biological aging. Not smoking. Not stress. Inflammation. And here's the number that should make you stop scrolling. By the time most people reach 50, their inflammatory markers are already twice what they were at 30. Twice, without them ever feeling sick. That is the biological environment where diseases take root. Where cellular age starts running ahead of calendar age. And where, this is the part that matters, the right food can physically push back. This is where it gets shocking, because the food Harvard identified doesn't just reduce inflammation, it targets the mechanism behind it. Let's start with the basics, and I promise this is more fascinating than any biology class made it sound. Every single cell in your body contains your DNA. And your DNA is packaged into structures called chromosomes. Now, at the very end of each chromosome, like the plastic tip on a shoelace, sit your telomeres. Telomeres are literally protective caps, and here's what makes them so important. Every time your cell divides, they get a little shorter. Every time. Without exception. A study published in The Lancet confirmed that telomere length is one of the most reliable indicators of biological age we have. Short telomeres? Your cells are aging fast. Longer telomeres? The opposite. The critical thing to understand is this. The rate at which your telomeres shorten is not fixed. It's variable. And diet is one of the most powerful variables we know of. That is the entire premise of what Harvard found. This food slows the shortening, and that alone could change everything about how long you live. So now you know what telomeres are. Here's where the Harvard study becomes genuinely remarkable. The food at the center of the study is nuts, specifically walnuts, almonds, and mixed tree nuts consumed as a daily habit. A handful. That's it. The Harvard Health Professionals Follow-Up Study and the Nurses' Health Study, combined, over 100,000 participants tracked across decades, found that people who ate a 1-ounce serving of nuts daily had measurably longer telomeres than those who did not. But what's the mechanism? Why would a handful of nuts protect your DNA? 3 reasons. First, nuts are loaded with polyphenols. plant compounds that directly reduce oxidative stress at the cellular level. Oxidative stress is one of the primary forces that accelerates telomere shortening. Second, nuts contain omega-3 fatty acids, particularly walnuts, which have been shown to reduce the inflammatory cytokines that directly attack the telomere structure. And third, and this is the part most people miss completely, nuts activate an enzyme called telomerase, which actually repairs telomere length. Not just protects it, repairs it. Let's talk about inflammation, because this is where it gets shocking. You have probably heard the word before. But chronic inflammation, the silent kind, the kind you cannot feel, is now understood by the scientific community as the root driver of nearly every major age-related disease. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, even certain cancers. A landmark meta-analysis published in Nature Medicine reviewed over 300 studies and reached one conclusion: the faster inflammation rises in your body, the faster your cells age. Every major longevity marker tracks with inflammatory load. Now here is what nuts do to inflammation. A study from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health found that daily nut consumption reduced circulating levels of interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein, two of the most well-studied inflammatory cytokines, by up to 30%. 30%. In people who simply added a handful of nuts to their daily eating. That is not a supplement trial. That is food. Real food. Measurably shifting your biology toward a longer life. This is the part most doctors don't explain, because the solution is embarrassingly simple. Now let's look at what happened to the actual biomarkers in the Harvard study, because numbers tell a story that words alone cannot. The participants who ate nuts daily, specifically those who averaged 1 ounce or more 5 or more times per week, showed something remarkable across 5 key longevity markers. 1. Telomere length. As we've covered, measurably longer in regular nut eaters. 2. C-reactive protein, the primary marker of systemic inflammation, was on average 20 to 30% lower in daily nut consumers. 3. LDL cholesterol, the kind linked to cardiovascular disease, was reduced by an average of 7% without any other dietary changes. 4. Fasting insulin levels, a key marker of metabolic health and a strong predictor of longevity, were significantly lower. 5. Blood pressure. Walnut consumers specifically showed a statistically significant reduction in systolic blood pressure, the top number that doctors focus on most. 5 separate longevity markers, all moving in the right direction from one dietary habit. That is not coincidence. That is biology. Now, the question everyone asks at this point, how much, and does it matter when? Let's be precise. Because the Harvard study was precise, and vague recommendations help nobody. The effective dose observed across the studies was 1 ounce of nuts per day. To put that in real terms, that's approximately 23 almonds or 14 walnut halves, or a small handful that fits in the palm of your hand. Not a bag, not a bowl, a handful. Now, does the type of nut matter? The evidence suggests walnuts led the outcomes on omega-3 and brain health markers. Almonds performed best on LDL reduction. Brazil nuts, just 2 per day, delivered the full beneficial daily dose of selenium, a mineral directly linked to telomere maintenance. Here's what nobody tells you about timing. The biomarker improvements were strongest in participants who ate their nuts with a meal, particularly breakfast or lunch, rather than as a late-night snack. Insulin response and nutrient absorption work in your favor earlier in the day. And perhaps the most surprising finding of all, the benefits were dose-capped. Eating more than 1 ounce did not significantly increase the benefit. But eating less than 1 ounce significantly reduced it. 1 ounce. Every day.
Live a
Earlier
healthier,
in the day.
longer life.
That is the prescription the data supports. Write this down, because this is the simplest longevity habit the science has ever handed you. All right. Let's bring it all together. The food at the center of this entire story is nuts. Specifically tree nuts, walnuts, almonds, cashews, pistachios, Brazil nuts. Not processed peanut butter from a jar with 3 types of sugar. Whole, raw, or lightly roasted nuts. And I know what some of you are thinking. Nuts? That's the Harvard finding? That's the 30-year conclusion? Yes, and here is why that should genuinely astonish you. Because the problem has never been that the answer was unknown. The problem is that we have spent decades looking for exotic solutions, rare supplements, expensive protocols, biohacking techniques, when the most rigorously studied longevity habit in the scientific literature has always been sitting in a bowl on your counter. The Harvard study didn't find a new drug. It found a food pattern that humans have eaten for thousands of years. And when they measured what it does to your telomeres, your inflammation, your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your insulin levels, the effect was undeniable. This is the part that most people miss completely. The answer was never complicated. We just stopped eating it consistently. Now let's talk about what actually happens inside your body when you make this a daily habit. In the first 30 days, your inflammatory markers begin to shift. Research from the Journal of Nutrition documented measurable reductions in carb within 4 weeks of daily nut consumption. 4 weeks. In the first 3 months, lipid panels start to improve. LDL begins to fall. Fasting insulin stabilizes. Your metabolic environment begins to reflect what the data promises. At 6 months, telomere maintenance enzymes, including telomerase, show measurably higher activity levels in regular nut consumers compared to those who don't eat them. Your cells are actively defending themselves differently. And, at 1 year, the Harvard data shows that consistent nut eaters have biological age markers that diverge meaningfully from non-eaters. The gap becomes measurable. Visible in the data. Here is what that means in human terms. You are not taking a drug. You are not enrolling in a clinical trial. You are adding a handful of something delicious to your morning, and your biology responds. Every single day. Compounding. That is the power of consistent, evidence-based eating. Not perfection. Not restriction. Addition. 1 handful. Every morning. If you made it this far, you now understand something that took Harvard researchers 30 years to confirm. And you have a plan to act on it starting tomorrow. If this video gave you something genuinely useful, here's what would help this channel more than anything. Hit subscribe. We put out science like this multiple times a week, real research, broken down so it actually means something in your daily life. And before you go, I want to know what you want to learn next. Drop a comment right now and tell me, what health topic do you want us to tackle? Sleep science? Your brain on sugar? The truth about seed oils? Whatever gets the most comments this week is what we are making next. So let's hear it. Share this video with someone in your life who needs to hear it. Because the research is clear. But most people will never come across it on their own. And stay tuned, because next week, we are covering something that might be even more surprising than today's findings. It involves one common habit that most people think is healthy, that the latest longevity research says is quietly accelerating your cellular aging. You do not want to miss it. 1 handful. Every morning, starting tomorrow. Your biology is listening.